Hello everyone, One True Natty here. Today we're going to continue with part 2 of revolver mechanisms. Last time we talked about SAO or single action only. Now we're going to talk about SADA, I might refer to it as SADA, or single action double action. So if you recall from the SAO autoloaders that single action only was not a bad design. You only had to rack the slide once and then you could fire the gun until it was empty. Now, in the revolver version, we've seen that it's actually a little bit more difficult. You have to pull back the hammer every time in order to fire the gun. So it's not quite as tactical, not quite an effective weapon for defense. So naturally, as we saw autoloaders go into single action, double action, there was also a natural progression and a desire to have the revolver also get to the point of being single action and double action as well. So if you recall, with SAO revolver, the hammer did 4 things, right? It would release a cylinder stop so the cylinder could turn, and then it would also have the cylinder hand reach out, push the cylinder into the next round, and then the cylinder stop would pop back up, and then the firing mechanism would be set, at which point you could pull the trigger and then the gun would fire. Now with SADA, what's happening here is that the trigger can now do all 4 jobs, and it will release the hammer as well. So let me get an example here. Let's do the Colt Trooper. So the Colt Trooper is an SADA revolver. You can fire the gun in single action, that's no problem. Okay, and then double action now, it's going to do everything SAO does, but it's also going to drop the hammer, or release the hammer, which would allow it to fire as well. So the SADA does everything SAO does, and it will release the hammer, which it will fire the gun as well. Now SADA is going to be the largest aspect of my collection. I think most of my guns are going to be SADA revolvers, but just to go through them all, I used to have 10 in total. The 10th one was a Colt Cobra, but I actually gave it to my best friend, so now I only have 9. So the 9 SADAs I have for the Smith & Wesson, this one is a model 10-7, so this used to be my pretty common carry gun before I switched over to LCP2. My other Smith is going to be the 29-2. I'm sure you've seen this guy on the channel a couple of times. Good old Dirty Harry gun. And then for my Colts, I have the Colt Trooper, which you've already seen. And then I have the Official Police, Colt Official Police. I have a way old video on that one. So that's 5. And then we have what you saw in SAO is this is the 9 H&R 9. So it's the cowboy gun that looks like SAO, but it's actually an SADA gun. And then I have a Rock Island Armory M206. This one is actually a second one. The first one I had, it actually wasn't timed correctly. So it was out of time, basically. And so I had my FFL send the gun back, and it took about maybe a year and a half, but eventually they did get one in the inventory. And this one's a lot better. The timing is actually on point for this gun. So, Rock Island Armory can be a little hit or miss. I know it's very hit or miss when it comes to their revolvers, but first one was a miss and this one's a hit, so that's good. And then this is a Charter Arms Undercover. It's not a modern one that you can get today. It's an old one. Old one they don't make anymore. This one also, I think I told you guys, this one went back a lot too. I think this went back twice to the factory. I was just dry firing it with snap caps, and eventually something on the inside, it didn't work anymore. So I sent it back. And I was asking them, can you dry fire with this gun with snap caps? And they're like, yeah. Like, okay. So price being unreasonable, ammo prices being unreasonable, I never shot it, but I did practice dry firing it. And then after like 300 dry fires, it went out of time again. So I sent it back to them, and this time they did a thorough research, and I guess they were saying something about the shape of the hammer. It was out of spec, and so the way that it was hitting the transfer bar was breaking it. Basically, it was a bar that was breaking. So they said they fixed that, and I've dry fired it, I'd say about 400 times since then. And so I'm going to guess it actually is fixed, but I do like it. It's pretty close to the size of a Smith & Wesson Model 36, the Chief Special. It's pretty close to that actually, and pretty close to like the Colts Cobra Detective Special, things like that. So, and then last is another H&R. This one's a Sportsman 999. So this is a top brake gun actually. So you load it and unload it from the top. So that's pretty neat. I had 2 of these, and this is my second one. So yeah, single action, double action revolvers is kind of my jam. Now most modern revolvers today are going to use a kind of a swing out cylinder system. So whether it's a Colt or a Ruger or a Smith or Taurus or whatever, there's going to be kind of the latch that either you push forward for the Smiths, push back for the Colts, or push in for Ruger. And it basically, as you whatever system they chose, you can push out the cylinder. So at this point you can of course load the gun or unload the gun. But before we got here, I think we should go back in time and revisit the Colt Peacemaker single action Army. This isn't a Peacemaker, this is a Rigid Mason Type 2, but it uses the same design, same loading, unloading. So as you remember, the loading and unloading mechanism for the Peacemaker is very slow. You can get pretty fast with unloading, but then loading, it's kind of like we're all in the same boat, you just have to practice your dexterity as much as you can, ignoring old age, things like that. But as you can imagine, there was a desire to have a better system, a system that would be a little bit more accessible to people in regards to reloading the gun. And Smith & Wesson would actually be the one to answer that call. They would do so with the top brake, Schofield top brake. So Smith & Wesson came up with this design, which you've seen in the SAO video. So you have to go past the first click, which means you can get to the latch. You open the latch, and then the whole gun opens up. That spring there, you would turn it and it would dump out all the rounds. The whole cylinder is exposed. Very easy for you to reload the gun. Now the Cowboys wouldn't have had something like this, but I found in my experiments that the Smith & Wesson Model 25, so that's kind of like Smith's 45 Colt model, in double action of course, their speed loaders actually seem to match up very well with the Schofields, those top brake Schofields. I just guessed, I wondered if it would, and it did. Now again, the Cowboys didn't have this, but as you can imagine, it'd be very easy to just pop this in, turn the knob, and the whole gun's loaded. Now the Cowboys didn't have that, but they may have something like that. And just to show you the unloading procedure, again, it's also very quick. Just turn it down, and the whole gun's ready to reload. So that was, a design idea which was very good, very good. A lot of people liked it. The only problem was frame rigidity. So basically, with the whole gun, being broken in half, it didn't have a very strong frame as a result, so it couldn't handle very high pressures. And 45 Colt is the round that everybody wanted to use at the time. That's what was being used in wars and things like that. So that was kind of our military round. And the top brake system, being not as strong, not as rigid, really couldn't take the pressures of 45 Colt. I think the most that Smith & Wesson spec'd it for was 45 Schofield. And 45 Schofield is very similar to 45 Colt. It's literally like, I think the same dimensions, but just a little bit shorter. So it has kind of like the same characteristics of 38 Special, 44 Special. Those rounds can be shot in a gun chambered in 357 or 44 Magnum. Now, of course, there is a universal law called Murphy's Law, which is my younger brother's name as well. And that law states that any worst situation that can happen will happen. And it did happen. So, our Army and Navy just had to choose You know, which one do you want? You want the, you know, the Peacemaker, or do you want the Schofield, right? And, you know, I think it was the Navy that picked the Peacemaker, but the Army actually went ahead and chose the Schofield. So, keeping in mind that they had to use specific ammunition, 45 Schofield only, I think they were shipped ammunition. It was the wrong one. It was 45 Colt, and so they can't use their guns. So at this point, they have a choice. Do we want to get the right ammo, or do we just want to switch over to the Peacemaker? Now, if they got the same ammo, yes, they would have the ability to load and unload their guns quickly, but then they just have 45 Colt rounds lying around for no reason. If they went with the Peacemaker can, because it's chambered in 45 Colt, it can shoot both 45 Colt and 45 Schofield. So in that situation, they just have, you know, guns that they're not using. And as you can imagine, people do order more ammo than the guns itself. So I think the Army actually ended up choosing the Peacemaker. They just had Peacemakers sent to them, and they were able to use both ammunitions, 45 Colt, 45 Schofield, and then the top brakes just didn't really do anything. Just laid around, probably got into the civilian market, things like that. But that's why the Peacemaker is kind of known as the gun that won the West, because it was able to beat out a much more sophisticated loading and unloading procedure, mostly by, I guess you could say, dumb luck. Now, Colt would be the trendsetter for the swing-out cylinder design, and there's three major ones that I'm aware of. So the first, all Colts have this, is the push-back method. So, as I said, you just pull back on the cylinder latch right here, and that allows you to push the cylinder out. Now you can load and unload the gun. And then Ruger, I forgot to mention I also have a Ruger SP101. I didn't think of it because I'm actually selling this gun pretty soon. Ruger uses more of a push in. So this cylinder latch right here, you just push this in, push that button in, and then you can push out the cylinder. And then you can load and unload the gun. Now the Smith, where's my Smiths? 29-2, this one is pushing forward. So this cylinder latch is going to be pushed forward, and then you can push out the cylinder, and then you can load and unload the gun. As far as those three major designs, is there advantage, disadvantage to them? Honestly, with training being the X factor, I would say no. I think they all work. Now, I am left-handed, and what I can tell you is that with being left-handed, with the Colts, I'll tend to use my leading finger in order to push back on that latch. And then with the Rugers, I tend to use my thumb. So I'll actually just kind of come over here, use my thumb, and push out the cylinder. And I do the same thing with the Smiths. I also use my thumb as a left-handed person. I'll just push that forward and unload the cylinder. So if you're left-handed, that's what I found works for me. With my little girl hands, I don't know. If you have bigger hands, maybe you can do it another way, but that's what works for me. Now, I'm not right-handed, but I'll try it right-handed. I think it's very difficult for me to do it right-handed with the Colts, because you have to pull back on this. Maybe I just have really short thumbs. It's a little difficult for me to kind of pull that back and push the cylinder out, or at least it feels weird to me. I have to really kind of anchor my shoulder in a weird position. So I don't like that one with my weak hand. The Ruger, I don't mind. The Ruger seems to be okay. I can just, push in and push out. It's not a problem. That's fine with me. And then with the Smiths, I think I also like that. You just push in with the thumb. If my thumbs are not short, push in with the thumb and push out the cylinder. So that's the only difference I noticed for me with the three cylinder latch methods. Being left-handed, I will just use my leading finger on the Colts and then my thumb on the Smith and Ruger. And then for right-handed, it's thumb with all of them, but I don't like the Colt with my weak hand. I think I do actually have short thumbs though, so if you have bigger thumbs, I think you'll be okay, but I don't, so that's how it feels like to me. I also would like to make a note on Ruger's revolver design. So every revolver with a swing out cylinder, Colt kind of started this, there's a side plate, there's a side plate that comes off, and you see the inside, the guts of the gun, how everything actuates each other, the trigger, you know, moving the hammer, things like that. It's pretty neat actually. Everyone uses this except for Ruger. Ruger has an interesting design. They didn't carve out the inside of the revolver for a side plate. It seems like the mechanism just pops in from the bottom. So the trigger guard system kind of pops into the frame, and the frame is very solid. That's why you see people say that the Ruger revolver is stronger. Now, I think stronger is a relative term. Yes, they tend to take abuse much better than Smiths or Colts, but I think that's more of a design issue rather than like the quality of their steel, because it's cast steel, whereas like you got steel, you know, real steel with the Smith and the Colts. And so I think it's because Ruger didn't carve out the side plate frame. That's why it's so strong, you know. But usually that comes at the cost of size. You know, Ruger guns, you know, being 5-shot, this is quite big for a 5-shot gun. You know, like typically I think in the same size frame, you can already get 6 shots. You know, with a Colt, or not a good example is 44 Magnum, but yeah, it just seems like Ruger, because of the cast steel not being as strong as like steel, it has to be a bit bigger, you know, to make up for that strength. So that's why I always feel like when people say that Rugers are stronger, it's like, well, relatively or objectively? Because I feel like objectively, no, but relatively, yeah, probably. But well, just something for you to think about. You may run into holster issues for that just because Ruger is kind of in its own category. Smith and Colt can be in their own category in regards to speed loaders, but I feel like holster size is pretty close. Very close to each other. Enough for interchangeability. Now I'm sure you're going to be annoyed by this, but it's always good to go over safety. Of course, as I mentioned, there's a certain way to hold the revolver. You want to keep the fingers and thumbs away from the front end of the cylinder and the barrel gap. A lot of gases are escaping from there. Again, in a smaller caliber, it's probably not a big deal. In 44 Magnum and up, you know, I'd say even 357 Magnum and up, you could really kind of burn yourself. So again, just the 2 holds that you can do. If you standardize your training, then have your hand go over, of course, and then your second hand goes inside this open area, and then your thumbs point down. Maybe not for me because I have short thumbs, but if you have longer thumbs, point them down, and that's it. Now you can do it that way, you can do it my way. I teach myself just mentally a whole different grip. So the first hand does go over, and then the second hand kind of goes over the thumb across from the other thumb here, and it's a whole different grip. So that's what I do. Just for me, it's mentally easier to be like, yo, this is the revolver hold, and then if I go back to autoloaders, that's autoloader hold. You know, so it's easier for me to separate the two. But like I said, I think most people that I know and train with, they just put their thumbs down, and that literally would be the easiest way. Now the next thing we want to talk about is speed loaders. So I think you may have seen a couple in my other videos, but with the swing out cylinder, there's going to be 2 major ways that you can unload the gun. One way is super correct, and the other way is kind of unnecessary. It's not correct, but I guess it's just a habit that people get into. So the correct way is that you will open the gun after you fired your shots, and you'll hold it completely vertical, and you'll just come over and hit the ejector rod. Bam, that's it, you're done. Okay, and then when you load the gun, of course we have 2 different types of speed loaders. I think I've showed you before. It's going to be kind of the HKS knob turn, and it's going to be the Safariland. You kind of press it into the cylinder. People, they like that. The only differences I'd say is that this one makes a lot of sound, this one doesn't. So if that's important to you, then there you go. And then for speed loaders as well, if the grip is not a target grip, so the Smith definitely has a big target grip, this can interfere with your speed loading. So depending on, you know, what speed loader you use, This one, for example, has a lot more height. Than, oh yeah. So that might be an issue. You know, even if you're able to kind of get the rounds in there and then you drop them, so you're stuck. You know, you're stuck unless you really yank it out of there. That can be a con. However, with these sort of like carry grips or combat grips, so a little bit smaller, there tend to be no problem with that at all. You know, those just really pop in there beautifully. So that's something for you to consider, is that if it's going to be a fighting gun for you, then I'd probably use more of the compact carry combat grip. Obviously, if it's just a fun gun that's for hunting or recreation, then you can go ahead and have the really big grip there. Just know that it could interfere with the speed loader. Now, I want to show you the Safariland version. Here it is. So, as you've seen with the HKS, you just turn the knob and it's pretty nice, pretty easy. Now with Safariland, you actually want to kind of grip the outside of it around here, you know, and you're going to push in, because the inside of there, in between those snap caps, that has to be pressed onto here, and that'll release the rounds. So hopefully you can see that, but just press down on here and then it drops the rounds, and that's it. Oh, that's hilarious. It was 357, so since the Colt Trooper is 38, it's not going to close. And so let me show you that. You see that? It's not going to close. So, as I said before, 357 cannot be put in 38, but 38 can be put in 357. Now, the unofficial way, or like the cool way that people do it, which I think is just bad habit, is when you unload the gun, we will tend to like turn it at 45 and just hit it here. I don't know why. I think it's just easier, you know, it's easier to go from there to here. But that's not correct, because you're not working with gravity, and I have had cases where rounds do get stuck in there, which is just more time you lose. So if you're training for combat, honestly, just turn it completely vertical and hit the ejector rod. Now the next thing I want to talk about is timing for SADA SADA revolvers. We talked about that with the SAO, and with the SADA, it's going to be a little bit harder to tell when it's out of time, except for single action. If it's out of time in single action, it's kind of a sign that, you know, the timing is going. So again, for that, it depends. It depends on what you do. I know that the Ruger and the Smiths, they're not going to be completely locked up when the trigger is fully pulled. So let me show you an example of that. So the Ruger SP101, full lockup means that you hold the trigger and the hammer goes all the way down. So it's just like that. And you can see, oh no, a little bit. The cylinder does move a little bit. Okay, so in full lockup, it's going to move. And that is normal for any gun besides Colts. Same thing for the Smith & Wesson Model 29. If we go into full lockup, that has some movement there as well. Now the Colts, let's try Colt Trooper. I know the Python won't move at all, but I'm not sure about my other Colts. This is not a Trooper, this is official police, I'm sorry. So this one, nothing. Nothing at all, no sound, period. Now let's get, where is my Colt Trooper? There it is. So Colt Trooper, let's see if that one's full lockup as well. Yes, it is. You don't hear a damn thing. And now the Python, my baby, one of my two babies. Same thing, full lockup, nothing, no sound at all. So that's pretty normal in Colts, that you're not going to have any kind of play in full lockup. Ruger and Smith, there can be some play. You know, that's not really a good indicator if the gun's out of time or anything. That's just the way that the gun is designed. So for Colts, at least I've tested it before on the Python, is at full lockup without momentum, which is hard to do that. I noticed it doesn't lock up actually. The cylinder stop isn't in place actually. But then when I pull the trigger and then I catch the hammer before it falls, then it does go into lockup. So I have actually experienced that with the Colts, at least on the Python, it will actually not be in the final click. It won't be in place actually. Scarily enough, it won't be in place. But when you pull the trigger, then it does click into place. Now that's not true for the Ruger and Smith. They will always be, they're always going to be at the last click. I don't know if I can do it again, but so what I'm saying is that if you cock it really slowly and it's not in time, and then you pull the trigger but catch the hammer before it falls, you can literally feel that the cylinder turns into the cylinder stop only after you pull the trigger. So let me see if I can do it. It's pretty difficult though. Give me some credit. No, that's in there. Yeah, it's too hard to do, but I used to do it a lot in the past, and yes, it's true. Colt really does. It's not fully in position until you pull the trigger. Now, Colt also has something that's called a stacking trigger, which means that the trigger gets heavier the more you pull on it until it releases the hammer. Okay, Smith and Ruger, their triggers weights tend to kind of like be the same as you pull through, but then Colts will kind of like, it'll be light and it'll get heavier until the trigger breaks. And I'll be honest, I didn't like that at first. My first experience with a stacking trigger was a Dan Wesson Model 15-2, and I hated it. But then as I got like Colts, Trooper, Cobra, Python, I actually like it now. So I think it's just the Dan Wesson, the way they did their stacking trigger, I hated it. But then once I got to the real Colts, then I was like, oh, I actually kind of like the stacking trigger. It's also more like challenging. It's more challenging to have something like that where it gets heavier as you pull compared to something that's always the same. Then you get used to it. It's good for proficiency, but it's not good for like, challenging and trying to upgrade your skill, your talents. Now, training protocol for the SADA revolver. Number one, I think, is you got to practice the double action trigger. I think the lightest you'll get is maybe 8 pounds, but I've shot some that were 9, 10, 11 pounds pretty easy. So you really got to have a strong trigger finger for the SADA revolver. Another thing too is I would practice the speed loader routine. I'd practice the unloading the correct way. I'd practice using the speed loaders and just kind of see if, like, at least for me, I know with my target guns that the speed loaders will interfere with that. So clearly it's not a fighting gun, but if it was a fighting gun, I'd make sure like, hey, this speed loader is interfering with how it's functioned, so I need to get a different grip, because you can't change speed loaders. Speed loaders are pretty standardized. They're either the HKS or some startup company. So, there's not much you can do there, but you can change the grips on your gun. That's something that you can control. Test it out, make sure that it works, it makes sense. Another thing too is you could practice counting your rounds, which can be difficult. I mean, it's going to be easy at the range, but in real combat, obviously you're not thinking about that. Just know you've got around 5 to 6 shots. So each one has to count, so if you have to put cover fire or things like that, you got to minus that from your 6 or 5. Okay, and then if you're going to try to take a shot at the bad guy, take him out, that's another shot you lost, and you may find yourself like, hey, rather than just take this last shot, maybe you should just dump out the whole thing and put in new 6 shots. That's something you may have to think about too. So counting your rounds is pretty important. I know that can be pretty difficult to do under stress. You can do it at the range. I think I've been accustomed to that pretty easy, but I'm just saying, like, in some kind of trial, IPSC, something like that, you really would have to keep your mind, keep track of how many rounds you have. Maybe this is a good time to reload or not. Another thing you could do is kind of like a very old cop method where they would fire 2 or 3 shots, and then if they were in good cover downtime, they'd actually open the cylinder, push the ejector out a little bit, kick out the empties, and put in new ones. So that's a very old cop method that maybe nobody's using anymore. But again, You grow in talent by challenging yourself, discipline. So that's something I could probably learn to do myself, actually. I was just trained starting in speed loader right away, but that's a good method that you could always do to try to increase your skill. All right, that's going to be the end of our SATA Revolvers Explained. As you can see, it's really just building off what we already know from SAO. Just one more action that the trigger does everything now. Instead of the hammer doing everything now for SATA, it's now the trigger doing everything, plus releasing the hammer, which would fire the gun. That double action trigger has got to be practiced, you know. And I'll be honest with you, when I started, I hated it too, but now I actually love it. I actually love it so much, I might be planning to sell my LCP2 for an LCP1. Now, I know that the LCP1 is not necessarily double action, but it's like 80% double action. I actually like dry fired one at Gary's Gun Shop, and I liked it. I liked it a lot, actually. So I'm really considering getting the LCP1. Now, speed loader training, that one's pretty important too, but that mostly depends on your grip. But this is going to be really kind of the most common choice for a fighting gun is SADA. Next time we're going to talk about DAO, which is not as common as SADA. It's kind of like with the autoloaders. You'll have quite a difficult time finding a DAO autoloader, or much less anybody that uses that. You'll also find a difficult time finding DAO. Well, not really. I think you have an easier time finding DAO revolvers, but you're not going to see too many people using it. I think I literally only have one DAO revolver. So that will probably be a pretty short video, though. There's not really too much to talk about that, other than the fact that there's no hammer on it. So thank you guys for watching. Please have a nice day. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
You learned martial arts! Martial arts, good!